Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. If you want more Sandman, I have extra stories that are too spicy for the main feed available on my Patreon. You can even join at the free tier and get everything. Today we are back in the book of Turkish folktales written down by Ignaz Kunos. In this story we have a skinned insect, an amazing horse, and babies that turn into dogs. Okay, let's begin. Kamer Taj the Mon horse. There once was a padishah who one day found a little insect. The padishah called his Lala and they both examined the tiny creature. What could it be? What could it feed on? Every day an animal was killed for its sustenance, and by living so it grew and grew until it was as big as a cat. Then they killed it and skinned it, hanging up the skin in the palace gate. The padishah now issued a proclamation that whoever could guess correctly to what animal the skin belonged should receive the sultan's daughter in marriage. A great crowd collected and examined the skin from all sides, but no one was ever found wise enough to answer the question. The story of the skin spread far and wide until it reached the ears of Adu. "That is exceedingly fortunate for me," he thought to himself. "I have had nothing to eat for 3 days. Now I shall be able to satisfy myself with the princess." So he went to the padishah and told him the name of the creature, and immediately demanded the maiden. "Woe is me," groaned the padishah. "How can I give this Dew my only daughter?" He offered him, in ransom for her, as many slaves as he liked, but all in vain. The Dew insisted on having the sultan's daughter. Therefore the padishah called the maiden and told her to prepare for the journey, as her kismet was the Dew. All weeping and wailing were fruitless. The maiden put on her clothes, while the Dew waited for her outside the palace. The padishah had a horse that drank the nectar of roses and ate grapes. Kamer Taj, or Moon Horse, was its name. This was the creature on which the sultan's daughter was to accompany the Dew to his abode. A cavalcade escorted her for a portion of the way, and then, turning, rode back. Now the maiden offered up a prayer to Allah to deliver her from the fiend. Suddenly the Moon Horse began to speak. "Lady, fear not. Shut both your eyes and hold my mane firmly." Hardly had she shut her eyes when she felt the horse rise with her, and when she opened her eyes again, she found herself in the garden of a lovely palace on an island in the midst of the sea. The Dew was very angry at the disappearance of the maid. "Still, never mind," he said. "I will find her soon," and he went home alone. Not far from the island, a prince sat in his canoe with his Lala. The prince, seeing on the calm surface of the water the reflection of the golden-hued steed, said to his Lala that perhaps someone had arrived at his palace. They rode to the island, got out of the canoe, and entered the garden. Here the youth saw the beautiful princess, who, however much she tried to veil her face, could not succeed in hiding from him her loveliness. "O Peri," said the prince, "fear me not, I am not an enemy." "I am only the sultan's daughter, a child of man, no Peri," announced the princess. And she told the prince how she had been delivered from the Dew. The prince assured her that she could not have come to a better place. His father also was a padishah. With her permission, he would take her to him, and by the grace of Allah, he would make her his wife. So they went to the padishah. The prince told him of the maiden's adventure, and in the end they were married. Merriment and feasting lasting 40 days and 40 nights. For a time they lived in undisturbed bliss, but war broke out with a neighboring kingdom, and, in accordance with the custom of that period, the padishah must also set out for the campaign. Hearing of this, the prince went to his father and asked permission to go to war. The padishah was unwilling to consent, saying, "You are young. Also, you have a wife whom you must not forsake." But the son begged so assiduously that in the end the padishah agreed to stay at home and let the prince go in his stead. the Dew discovered that the prince would be on the battlefield, and he also made further discovery that during his absence, a son and a daughter had been born to him. At that time, Tartars were employed as messengers and carried letters between the Padishah at home and the prince at the seat of war. One of these messengers was intercepted by the Dew and invited to a coffee house. There the Dew entertained him so long that it turned to night. The messenger wished to be off, but he was persuaded that it would be better to remain till morning. At midnight, while he was asleep, the Dew searched his letter bag and found a letter from the Padishah to the prince, informing the latter that a baby son and daughter had come to the palace during his absence. Tearing up this letter, the Dew wrote another to the effect that a couple of dogs had been born. "Shall we destroy them, or keep them till you return?" wrote the Dew in the false letter. This missive he placed in the original envelope, and in the morning the Tartar arose, took his sack of letters, and went to the prince's camp. When the prince had read his father's letter, he wrote to the following answer: "Shah and father, do not destroy the young dogs, but keep them until I return." This was given to the Tartar, who set out on his return journey. He was again met by the Dew, who enticed him to a coffee house, and detained him until the next morning. During the night, the Dew abstracted the letter, and wrote another, which said, "Shah and father, take my wife and her 2 children, and throw them down a precipice, and bind the Mon horse with a 50-ton chain." In the evening of the day following, the Tartar delivered the letter to the Padishah. When the princess saw the Tartar, she hastened joyfully to the monarch, that he might show her her husband's letter. The Padishah, having read it, was astonished and dared not show it to the princess, so he denied that any letter had arrived. The woman answered, "I have indeed seen the letter with my own eyes. Perhaps some misfortune has happened to him, and you are keeping it from me." Then, catching a glimpse of the letter, she put forth her hand and quickly took it. Having read it, the poor woman wept bitterly. The monarch did his best to comfort her, but she refused to remain longer in the palace. Taking her children, she left the city and went forth into the wide world. Days and weeks passed away, and she was without food to appease her hunger, or bed on which to rest her tired body. Until worn out with fatigue, she could go no step further. "Let not my children die of hunger," she prayed. Behold, instantly water gushed forth from the earth, and flour fell from the skies, and making bread with these, she fed her children. In the meantime, the Dew heard of the woman's fate, and set out immediately to destroy the children. The princess saw the Dew coming, and in her terrible agony she cried, "Hasten, my Kamer Taj, or I shall die." In the far-off land, the magic horse heard this cry for help. He strained at his 50-ton fetters, but could not break them. The nearer the Dew came, the more the poor princess's anguish increased. Clasping her children to her breast, she sent up another despairing cry to the moon horse. The fettered steed strained still more at his chain, but it was of no avail. The Dew was now quite close upon her, and for the last time the poor mother shrieked with all of her remaining strength. Kamer Taj, hearing it, put forth all the force he could muster, broke his chain, and appeared before the princess. "Fear not, lady," he said. "Shut your eyes and grasp my mane." And immediately they were on the other side of the ocean. Thus the Dew went hungry once more. The moon horse took the princess to his own country. He felt that at last his hour had come, and told his beloved mistress that he must die. She implored him not to leave her alone with their children. If he did, who would protect them from the evil designs of the Dew? "Fear not," the horse comforted her. "No evil will befall you here. When I am dead, take off my head and set it in the earth. Slit up my stomach, and having done this, lay yourself and your children within it." Saying these words, the magic horse breathed his last. The princess now cut off his head and stuck it in the ground, then opened his stomach and laid herself and her children in it. Here they fell fast asleep. When she awoke, she saw that she was in a beautiful palace, one finer than either her father's or her husband's. She was lying in a lovely bed, and hardly had she risen when slaves appeared with water. One bathed her, one clothed her. The twins lay in a golden cradle, and nurses stood around them, soothing them with sweet songs. At dinner time, gold and silver dishes appeared laden with delicious food. It was like a dream, but days and weeks passed away. Weeks passed into months, and months into years, and still the dream, if it was a dream, did not come to an end. Meanwhile, the war was over, and the prince hastened home. Seeing nothing of his wife, he asked his father what had become of her and her children. The Padishah was astonished at this strange question. The letters were produced, and the Tartar messenger was sent for. Being closely questioned, he related the account of his meeting with the Dew on both occasions. They now realized that the Dew had tampered with the messenger and the correspondence. There was no more thought of peace for the prince until he had discovered his wife. With that intention, he set out in the company of his Lala. They wandered on and on unceasingly. 6 months had passed already, yet they continued their way over hill and down dale, never stopping to rest. One day they reached the foot of a mountain, where they could see the palace of the Moon Horse. The prince was entirely exhausted and said to his Lala, "Go to that palace and beg for a crust of bread and a little water, that we may continue our journey." When he reached the palace gate, the Lala was met by 2 little children, who invited him to rest. Entering, he found the floor of the apartment so beautiful that he hardly dared set his foot upon it. But the children pulled him to the divan and made him sit down while food and drink were set before him. The Lala excused himself, saying that outside his tired son was waiting, and he wished to take him the refreshment. "Father Dervish," said the children, "eat first yourself, then you can take food to your son." So the Lala ate, drank coffee, and smoked. And while he was preparing to return to the prince, the children went to tell their mother about the guest. Looking out of the window, the princess recognized the prince as her husband. She took food with her own hands and put it in golden vessels sent out by the Lala. On receiving it, the prince was struck with the richness of the service. He lifted the cover of one of the dishes, set it on the ground, and it rolled back to the palace of its own accord. The same happened with the other dishes, and when the last had disappeared, a slave came to invite the stranger to take coffee in the palace. While this was happening, the princess gave each of her children a wooden horse, and sent them to the gate to receive the guests. "When the dervish comes with his son," said the mother, "take him to such and such an apartment." The dervish and his son came up. The 2 children on their wooden horses greeted them with a salam, and escorted them to their apartments. Again the princess took the dishes of food and said to the children, "Take these to our guests and press them to eat. If they say they have already had enough, and ask you to partake of the food, answer that you are also satisfied. But perhaps your horses are hungry, and put them under the table. They will probably ask, 'How can wooden horses eat?' And you must reply, 'Shh, shh, shh.'" Here she whispered something into the children's ears. The children did as their mother had commanded them. The food was so delicious that the guests tried to eat a second time, but becoming satisfied very soon, they asked, "Won't you eat too, children?" "We cannot eat," answered the children, "but perhaps our horses are hungry." So saying, they drew them up onto the table. "Children," the prince remonstrated, "wooden horses cannot eat." "That you seem to know," answered the children. "But apparently you do not know that it is impossible for little dogs to become human children such as we are." The prince sprang up with a cry of joy, kissed and embraced both of his children. His wife entering at the moment, he humbly begged her pardon for the suffering she had experienced. They related to each other all that had befallen them during their time of separation, and their joy knew no bounds. Now the prince and her children were prepared to accompany the prince back to his own kingdom. After they had gone some distance, they turned to take a farewell look at the palace, and lo, the wind swept over the place as though no building had ever been there. The Dew was lurking on the wayside, but the prince caught him and killed him, and after that they arrived home without any further adventures. Soon afterwards the old Padishah died, and the prince became the chief of the land. 3 apples have fallen from the sky. One belongs to the storyteller, the second to the listener, the third to me. The end. I loved this tale of trickery and tragedy. I feel bad for the horse, and I was a little shocked at the tauntaun situation that happened. And I just found out that Luke's tauntaun was named Reba. Weird. I like the addition of the Tartars, as I feel that they are kind of erased from history, but that may just be me. I like the kids calling out the prince for thinking that dogs can become human, and I have a lot more stories in this book, so we'll keep at it for a long while. And the podcast Shoutout is to Not Just Any Book Club. Justin and Pierce, and sometimes Luke, get together and talk about books and more. They pick books based on monthly themes, and then go through and discussing them without spoiling the story. You can jump in on any episode and feel like you're among friends. And if you like their show as much as I do, go and give them a like, a rating, and a review. And the listener shoutout is to Port Louis, Mauritius. According to the Wikipedia, Port Louis was used as a harbor by the Dutch settlers from the 1606, when they started to refer to the area as the Harbor of Tortoises. In 1736, under the French government, it became the administrative center of Mauritius, and a major reprovisioning halt for French ships during their passage between Asia and Europe, around the Cape of Good Hope. The port is named in honor of King Louis XV. During this period of French colonization, Mauritius was known as Île-de-France. I would love to visit this island nation someday. The locals speak a language called Mauritian, a Creole with French roots, but many people speak some French or English to accommodate the tourists that visit often. And so to my listener in Port Louis, I say, merci et bonsoir. Thank you, and good night.